Monica and George had been married for 2 years, and all of their friends and acquaintances saw them as the perfect couple. They met accidentally, and back at the time, neither of them even suspected that it would lead to anything bigger than just a friendship. George had a job as a manager in a trading company and dreamed of getting promoted. But things were a bit different for Monica. She wasn't very ambitious regarding her career and mostly wanted to start a family. Since the young woman grew up in an orphanage, she was deprived of parental warmth and affection from an early age. Therefore, when George started courting Monica, her joy knew no bounds. Finally, a worthy man appeared in my life, the woman thought. However, what made Monica even happier was the fact that George's mother accepted her as her own daughter the moment they met. Charlotte White raised her son alone since her husband died in a car accident over 20 years ago. Surrounding her beloved son with care and attention, the woman did everything to ensure that the boy had everything he needed and got a good education that would serve him well in the future. When Monica came over to George's place, she was anxious about how she would be received by his family. The young woman was so frightened by the stories of her friends about their terrible relationships with their mother-in-laws that she was truly afraid of Mrs. White. But when Monica finally got to meet George's mother, all of her fears evaporated like morning mist on a warm June day. "Hello, honey. You're exactly how I imagined you. You know, you look even a little like my late mother," Mrs. White said from the doorway. Monica immediately felt relieved and couldn't help but smile. Next to such a kind person, she felt an inexplicable surge of strength and energy. Mrs. White cooked a delicious dinner to celebrate the introduction, pleasantly surprising the guests with the abundance of dishes and their amazing taste. When George and Monica announced that they were planning on getting married, the woman's joy knew no bounds. "Finally, I'm so happy, dear." Frankly speaking, Charlotte liked Monica at first sight, and she immediately knew that she would grow to love her soon. "How did I get so lucky to have such an amazing daughter-in-law?" Mrs. White kept repeating. The most surprising thing was that after the wedding, the relationship between Charlotte and her daughter-in-law didn't get any worse. On the contrary, they became even closer. Seeing a kindred spirit in Monica, Charlotte started teaching her all the little tricks that could help her with cooking and all the household chores. When making a pie, don't ever compromise on the quality of the dough. It should be well mixed and it shouldn't have any lumps, said Charlotte, whose baking skills were truly incredible. "Thank you, Mrs. White. I don't know what I would do without you." Monica was very happy with all the attention she got from her mother-in-law. She treated her with not only love, but with respect. Meanwhile, George couldn't be happier with the fact that his wife and mother were getting along so well. Since the man directed all of his strength to work, he would simply have no time to deal with the potential family squabbles. 6 months after the wedding, Monica found out that she was pregnant. "That's incredible news. Wonderful, just wonderful. I'm sure it's a boy, someone to inherit the business," George exclaimed, having a hard time restraining his excitement. Monica bit her lip, then said cautiously, "Why are you so sure that it's a boy? There's a 50% chance it's a girl. It's not like we get to choose." George raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What do you mean a girl? No girls. I need an heir, period. I need a son to take over the business when he grows up." "Don't be so overly dramatic, son. What difference does it make if it's a boy or a girl, as long as the baby's healthy?" Mrs. White tried to diffuse the situation. But there was no changing George's mind. He was firmly convinced that he only wanted a son and would never be happy with a daughter. The man believed that he would certainly succeed in business and will be managing his own firm in the next 5 to 7 years. George's mind was already painting him a picture of how he'd teach his son to do business and then take him to the office to introduce him to his colleagues, and how they would all look at him admiringly. In order to get her husband to calm down a little, Monica told him that they needed to wait 3 months before they could learn the sex of the baby. "Well, I don't mind, but I know it's a boy. George White is having a son, period," the man summed up. Monica exchanged a meaningful look with her mother-in-law, but declined to comment. George always had a bad temper, and therefore she tried not to get into confrontations with him. 3 months flew by. During this time, not a single day passed that George didn't say that he was 100% sure that they were having a son. But when the sonographer did the ultrasound, it turned out that the young parents were actually having a baby girl. I don't believe it. It has to be a mistake. Everyone in my family always had sons," George exclaimed. In response to this, doctors just shrugged their shoulders and referred to the fact that genetics could be extremely unpredictable and that even the most reliable theories would fail sooner or later. After the ultrasound, George seemed to have been replaced. He immediately became cold towards his wife, as if Monica was to blame for the fact that she was having a daughter. But that wasn't the only thing that upset the mother-to-be, who had to deal with such a strange reaction from her husband to the fact that she couldn't somehow ensure that she would have a boy. Charlotte White had started complaining of chest pains, which were only getting worse since the woman was refusing to get treatment. Like many elderly people, Mrs. White strongly disliked hospitals and doctors, whom she respected and appreciated nevertheless. "You can't behave like that. You need to take care of your health. Everything else can wait," Monica said, trying to reason with her mother-in-law. "I can't deal with that right now. Let's wait until you give birth, and then we can revisit this issue. I'll be fine, don't worry about it. I'll make myself a cup of herbal tea and I'll be feeling better in no time. Trust me, I've done it before," Mrs. White said. Unfortunately, the woman didn't get better. She actually got much worse. By that point, Monica was already nearing her due date and couldn't devote much time to her mother-in-law. George seemed to be avoiding his home altogether, spending more and more time at work. It just so happened that the heart attack caught Mrs. White in the backyard, where she was about to water the flowers and treat the trees with an aphid solution. Monica was the one who found the old woman. She knelt down by her mother-in-law and took her hand. Charlotte's pulse was barely palpable, which made Monica realize how serious the situation was and call an ambulance. Unfortunately, despite the best effort of the resuscitation team, the elderly woman died in the hospital, having never even regained consciousness. Both Monica and George seemed to be in some kind of a daze during the funeral and the wake. Standing by the coffin of her late mother-in-law, Monica noticed something she'd never seen before. There was a large mole shaped like a heart on the late woman's left wrist. Monica had probably never noticed it before because the old woman usually wore long-sleeve dresses, which she was very fond of. When her mother-in-law died, Monica felt the kind of emptiness that only people who'd lost family members could understand. George was also very upset by the death of his mother, who raised him alone and gave up everything so that he could grow up a worthy person. At some point, his wife's pregnancy seemed to have faded into the background as George was overcome with grief. Despite the fact that the doctors recommended that Monica get admitted to the hospital a week before her due date, the woman decided to stay home until she started having contractions. Feeling a sharp pain in the lower abdomen, Monica chose not to bother her husband and called a cab. The woman didn't really remember how she got to the hospital. Throwing anxious glances at the back seat once in a while, the taxi driver was drenched in sweat, while the woman kept repeating, "It hurts so bad. Can't you go any faster?" That morning, the taxi driver broke his own speed record and got the woman to the hospital in just 5 minutes. "Well, it's going to get better now, don't worry," the driver whispered, helping Monica get out of the car. Having gotten the woman to the doctors, the driver leaned back against the wall of the clinic and wiped the sweat off his forehead. Despite the emotional beginning of Monica's labor, the rest went quickly and smoothly, and in just half an hour, the woman gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Holding the baby, the young woman couldn't help but tear up, thanking heaven that everything went well. But what she wanted most at that moment was to share this joy with her husband, who didn't even know that he'd become a father. Unfortunately, when the on-call nurse decided to tell George White the good news, it turned out that he didn't even want to come to the hospital to take his wife and daughter home. How's that even possible? Is he insane? I've never seen anything like this. I mean, I saw a lot of different things in my lifetime, but this is a first. The doctor who delivered Monica's baby couldn't help but comment. Monica lowered her eyes in embarrassment and sniffled quietly. She didn't want to tell the doctor that her husband only wanted a boy and that the birth of a daughter wasn't part of his life plan. Monica stayed at the hospital for 2 days, at which point the doctors and nurses finally managed to convince George to come in and see his newborn daughter. Having arrived at the hospital, the businessman went into Monica's room with an indifferent expression on his face and a small bouquet of flowers. When George opened the door, the first person he saw was Monica, who was holding a tiny baby in her arms. "And here's our daddy," Monica exclaimed happily. George took a few steps and hesitated. The man's gaze involuntarily lingered on the baby's hand, which was squeezing his mother's curl in her wrinkled, small fingers. George's eyes suddenly got filled with tears, which quickly started streaming down his cheeks, flushed with shame. There was a little birthmark in the shape of a heart on the baby's left hand, the same as George's late mother had. "Dear Lord, this is so surreal. Mom? Mommy?" George whispered and sank to his knees with a groan. At that moment, he couldn't be happier with Monica, who gave him a daughter who would grow up to look like his mother. But the main surprise was waiting for George a little later when Monica let him hold his daughter for the first time and told him her name. "It's Charlotte. Of course it's Charlotte." Looking lovingly at his daughter, George couldn't believe his eyes. Yesterday, he only wanted to have a son, but now he couldn't get enough of his daughter, who looked like a small blonde angel. Ever since then, George had repeatedly thought back to the times when he naively thought that raising a boy would be better than a girl. When you're truly happy in marriage, the gender of your unborn child doesn't really matter, because it is only the child's upbringing that determines who they will become in the future.